Monaco, Spa, Monza, and Indianapolis are the tracks that I think always require a certain amount of attention because of the history and drivers that have raced them. People have asked me just about every Formula One question you can imagine over the years. They ask about the podiums. They ask about driving for Ferrari, about racing for Renault. Sometimes they ask what it was like to spend more than a decade competing against some of the greatest drivers the sport has ever known. Every now and then someone asks which race I remember the most. I never mind answering those questions. Those memories are part of my life. But once in a while, someone asks a question that makes me pause before I answer. Eddie, who are the 5 greatest Formula One drivers you ever saw? Now that's a very different conversation, because this isn't about world championships. It isn't about race wins. It isn't about pole positions. And it certainly isn't just about raw speed. I've seen plenty of fast drivers. Formula One has never been short of speed. But greatness is something else. It's the driver who changes the atmosphere of an entire paddock the moment he arrives. It's the one who makes everyone else raise their own standard. The one who forces engineers to think differently. The one who makes the rest of the grid believe that even perfection might not be enough. I was fortunate to race in one of Formula One's greatest eras. I shared circuits with world champions. I watched extraordinary talents grow into legends. Some were rivals, some were teammates, others were simply drivers I admired from across the pit lane. Each of them left a different impression on me. And even after all these years, those impressions have never faded. So if you ask me who the 5 greatest drivers I ever witnessed were, these are the names that immediately come to mind. Let me start with Alain Prost. People called him the Professor, and the older I get, the more I understand why that nickname fit him so perfectly. I had the chance to see him up close when we were teammates at Renault in 1983. Before that season, I already knew he was quick. Everyone in Formula One did. But sharing a team with someone is completely different from racing against him. That's when you begin to see the details nobody else notices. What made Alain so exceptional was never his outright speed. Of course he was fast, but plenty of drivers were fast. What separated him from almost everyone else was the way he thought through an entire Grand Prix before the race had even settled into its rhythm. He always seemed to know which battles were worth fighting and which ones weren't. He rarely abused the tires. He never looked like he was driving beyond the limit. Yet somehow, lap after lap, he would still be there, putting pressure on everyone ahead of him. There was an incredible sense of patience about the way he raced. He understood that winning on Sunday wasn't about setting the fastest lap every 5 minutes. It was about making fewer mistakes than everybody else. Working alongside him also showed me how much Formula One happens away from the racetrack. After every practice session, Alain could spend hours talking with the engineers. His feedback wasn't emotional. It was calm, specific, methodical. He could describe exactly how the car behaved through different corners, how the balance changed as the fuel load came down, and what adjustments would make the biggest difference. Watching those conversations taught me that developing a Formula One car was almost as important as driving it. One season in particular summed up who Alain Prost was. In 1983, he came within a single race of becoming world champion with Renault. Going into the final round at Kyalami, he led the championship, but Nelson Piquet ultimately claimed the title after mechanical problems forced Alain to retire. Most people remember that season because he narrowly missed the championship. I remember something different. I remember how consistently competitive he had been from the very first race to the very last. There were faster weekends for other drivers. There were more spectacular performances. But Alain almost never disappeared. That consistency is what made him so dangerous. Looking back now, I don't think Alain Prost taught me how to drive faster. He taught me that intelligence could be just as powerful as courage. In Formula One, emotion can win you a race. Clear thinking can win you a career. That's why whenever people ask me about the greatest drivers I ever witnessed, Alain Prost will always be one of the very first names that comes to mind. Now this one is completely different. Ayrton Senna didn't just race a Formula One car. Sometimes it felt like he was asking it to do things that shouldn't have been possible. The first time I really appreciated just how special he was during his rookie season in 1984. He arrived in Formula One driving for Toleman, a team that simply wasn't expected to fight near the front. Nobody looked at that car and imagined it challenging the established teams. Yet somehow, Ayrton kept finding speed that didn't seem to exist. What made him different was never just raw pace. It was his absolute commitment. Every qualifying lap looked as though he had accepted there was no safety margin left. He wasn't reckless. There was a difference. He simply trusted his own instincts more than most drivers trusted the limits of the car. His confidence behind the wheel was extraordinary. When the track was dry, he was intimidating. When it rained, he became something else entirely. Most drivers lose confidence when the grip disappears. Ayrton seemed to gain it. The changing conditions almost gave him more opportunities to separate himself from everyone else. That wasn't luck. It was car control of the very highest level. He had an uncanny ability to feel exactly what the tires were doing beneath him. Watching him drive in difficult weather was like watching someone solve a problem that nobody else could even understand. One race has always stayed in my mind. The Monaco Grand Prix in 1984. The conditions were miserable. Rain covered the circuit, visibility was poor, and mistakes were happening everywhere. Ayrton started deep in the field with that Toleman and began passing drivers in cars that should have been far superior. By the time the race was stopped early because of the weather, he had caught Alain Prost and looked capable of taking the lead. Officially, he finished second, but that afternoon changed the way the entire paddock looked at him. Nobody left Monaco wondering whether Ayrton Senna belonged in Formula One. The only question after that was how many championships he might eventually win. Even after he joined Lotus and later McLaren, that same intensity never disappeared. You could see it in qualifying. You could see it in testing. You could even see it walking through the paddock. Everything mattered to him. Every lap, every adjustment, every tiny detail that could make the car just a little bit faster. Looking back now, I don't think Ayrton taught the rest of us that courage was enough. He showed us that true greatness comes from complete commitment, from refusing to accept limits that other people believe are impossible. Very few drivers have ever possessed that kind of belief. That's why, even decades later, Ayrton Senna remains one of the most unforgettable competitors I have ever witnessed. Here's where things become a little more complicated. Because Nelson Piquet wasn't always the driver people talked about first. He didn't have Alain Prost's smooth precision. He didn't have Ayrton Senna's dramatic intensity. But if you spend enough time around Formula One during the 1980s, you quickly realize just how dangerous Nelson really was. What made him so exceptional was never that he looked spectacular behind the wheel. In fact, sometimes he made everything appear surprisingly ordinary. That was exactly what fooled people. He understood that a world championship wasn't won by impressing the crowd. It was won by making the smartest decisions over an entire season. Nelson had an incredible ability to read a race. He knew when to attack. He knew when to protect the car. And perhaps most importantly, he knew when finishing second was actually a better result than risking everything for first. That kind of judgment doesn't always make the highlight reels, but it wins championships. Another quality I always admired was his technical understanding. Engineers respected his feedback because it was clear and practical. He wasn't simply describing what the car felt like. He understood why it behaved that way. Whether he was driving for Brabham, Williams, or later Lotus, you could see how involved he was in helping shape the direction of the car. Drivers often receive the credit on Sunday afternoons. People sometimes forget how much of Formula One is built during long evenings inside the garage. Nelson never overlooked that part of the job. One season captures his strengths better than almost any other. In 1983, he entered the final race at Kyalami, chasing Alain Prost for the World Championship. Prost had led much of the season with Renault and looked like the favorite, but Nelson stayed patient. When Prost retired with turbo failure during the race, Piquet did exactly what he needed to do, finishing third to secure his second World Championship. It wasn't the most dramatic victory in Formula One history. It was something even more impressive. It was the reward for an entire season of intelligent racing. That was classic Nelson Piquet. He rarely wasted opportunities. He rarely let emotions dictate his decisions. He understood that championships are often decided by discipline rather than brilliance. Looking back now, I think Nelson changed the way I viewed success in Formula One. You don't always have to be the fastest driver every weekend. You don't always need to produce the most unforgettable performance. Sometimes the greatest competitors are the ones who understand the bigger picture better than everyone else. Nelson Piquet was one of those drivers. He proved that intelligence, patience, and consistency could be every bit as powerful as raw speed. And that's a lesson I've never forgotten. And then there was Niki Lauda. If there was one driver who completely changed the way I thought about Formula One, it was Niki. People often remember the championships. They remember the rivalry with James Hunt. They remember the incredible comeback after Nürburgring. Those moments deserve to be remembered. But they aren't the first things that come to my mind. What impressed me most was the way Niki approached the sport every single day. What made him different was never extraordinary car control alone. It was the way he removed emotion from the decision-making process. Most racing drivers trust instinct. Niki trusted information. He wanted facts. He wanted data. He wanted to understand exactly why a car behaved the way it did. That mindset made him invaluable to every team he drove for. Whether it was Ferrari, Brabham, or later McLaren, engineers listened when Niki spoke. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply wanted the fastest possible race car. Sometimes that meant asking uncomfortable questions. Sometimes it meant rejecting ideas everyone else believed were correct. He had the confidence to challenge assumptions because he understood the technical side of Formula One better than almost anyone. Watching him work inside the garage was fascinating. He could complete a run, climb out of the cockpit, and explain exactly where the balance changed from one section of the circuit to another. There was no unnecessary drama, no exaggerated complaints. Just clear, logical observations that helped the team improve the car. That kind of professionalism isn't always visible to the fans. But inside Formula One, everyone understood how valuable it was. One season captures that perfectly. In 1984, Niki returned with McLaren alongside Alain Prost. Many people expected Prost to be quicker over the course of the year. In many races, Prost actually won more Grands Prix that season. But Niki rarely wasted points. He managed races with remarkable discipline, and by the end of the championship, he defeated Prost by just half a point, the closest championship finish in Formula One history. That title wasn't won through spectacular moments alone. It was built through consistency, precision, and an almost unmatched ability to maximize every opportunity. That was classic Niki Lauda. He understood that championships are often decided on ordinary afternoons, not unforgettable ones. Looking back now, I think Niki taught everyone around him an important lesson. Talent may open the door to Formula One, but discipline is what keeps you competing at the very highest level. His career proved that intelligence, preparation, and honesty with yourself can be just as important as bravery behind the wheel. I've admired many drivers throughout my life. Very few changed the sport simply by the way they thought about it. Niki Lauda was one of those rare people, and that's why I'll always consider him one of the greatest drivers I ever had the privilege to witness. The last name on my list is Gilles Villeneuve. Even now, all these years later, it's difficult to talk about Gilles without feeling a little emotional. Because drivers like him don't come along very often. He wasn't defined by statistics. He wasn't remembered simply because of championships. In fact, he never won one. Yet somehow, he became one of the most respected drivers Formula One has ever known. That tells you everything you need to know. The first thing everyone noticed about Gilles was his fearlessness. But I don't think that word tells the whole story. He wasn't taking risks just to entertain people. He drove with absolute commitment because that was the only way he knew how to race. Every lap looked like it mattered. Every overtake looked like he believed there was always one more opportunity waiting. What made him truly different was the way he could control a car that constantly seemed to be moving underneath him. The Ferrari wasn't always the easiest machine to drive. It demanded confidence. It demanded quick reactions. And Gilles seemed completely comfortable living on that edge. He could catch slides that most drivers never would have attempted to save. He attacked corners with an intensity that forced everyone else to rethink what was possible. There was a level of car control that simply couldn't be measured by lap times alone. One race has always stood out to me, the Spanish Grand Prix in 1981. Gilles put his Ferrari on pole, but during the race he spent the closing laps leading a train of much faster cars. Jacques Laffite, John Watson, Carlos Reutemann, Elio de Angelis. They were all right behind him, lap after lap, looking for even the smallest opening. Yet Gilles never made the mistake they were waiting for. He crossed the finish line just over a second ahead after holding them off for nearly the entire final part of the race. It remains one of the finest defensive drives Formula One has ever seen. Then, less than a year later, everything changed. During qualifying for the Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder in 1982, Gilles suffered the accident that took his life. The shock spread through every garage almost immediately. Formula One had lost one of its brightest stars. For those of us who raced during that era, it was a painful reminder of how fragile this sport could be. Looking back now, Gilles Villeneuve taught me something that had nothing to do with championships. He reminded all of us why people fall in love with motor racing in the first place. Not because it's predictable, not because it's safe, but because every once in a while someone comes along whose passion is impossible to ignore. Gilles was one of those people. His career was far too short. His story ended far too soon. But the respect he earned has never disappeared. That's why, whenever I think about the greatest drivers I ever witnessed, Gilles Villeneuve will always have a place in that conversation. When I look back on my years in Formula One, I don't spend much time thinking about where I finished in the standings. Time has a way of changing what matters. The trophies stay on a shelf. The race results become part of the record books. And eventually, someone else comes along and breaks the records you thought would last forever. But the people never leave you. I still remember the drivers I shared the grid with. The ones who pushed me to become better. The ones who showed me different ways to think about racing. And the ones who reminded all of us just how extraordinary this sport could be. Formula One has always been about more than machines. It's about the men willing to climb into those machines, knowing exactly what the risks were every single Sunday. I was fortunate to witness some of the greatest drivers this sport has ever produced. And even after all these years, I still feel grateful that our paths crossed. Because long after the engines fall silent, those memories never do.